I don't know if I'm flexible enough to film here. This video is already like super stressing me out. So I want to do a bookshelf tour. Everyone does a bookshelf tour. How do people film up here? If you could see what I have going on here to get this to work, I have an end table. I have 3 huge travel books. I have several large cardboard blocks that my kids use, plus a tripod. This is insane. I have books all over my house. So for me to do like a bookshelf tour, it's not like an easy thing in which I just like show you these bookcases I have next to each other, because that's not how our layout works or how the way we organize books in our house works. I'm only going to show you my adult books because I probably have combined adult and children's books well over 1,000 books, and you don't want to see 1,000 books, especially because this isn't really like a children's books channel. If you want to see a bookshelf tour of my kids' books, please say so in the comments, and I will film one this summer. Not right now, but this summer after I have a chance to get them a little bit more organized, because I do have a lot of cool kids books and picture books are beautiful. Okay, so we're going to start with my fiction section, and you can see up here, which we're not going to go into because it's an absolute disaster, because things up there include a keyboard I took away from my children, my wedding album, a piece of wood that I think belongs to one of our dining room chairs that broke off and we haven't fixed it yet, some games I hate, and my 8th grade memory book, which I just can't bring myself to give away, but like I don't want it anymore, obviously. Okay, time for books, which is the fun thing everybody's here for. I left this up just because I wanted to show you all. This is a beautiful picture that one of my friends made for me. And if she's cool with me posting about her, I'll put it in the comments or in the description, but I don't know if she is cool with that yet. My tripod's shaking. Stop that. Okay, let's go. So this is my fiction shelf where the majority of the fun books I read are. So we start, it's hard to see over here. We've got Persuasion and Northanger Abbey. I also have Lady Susan. I don't have any of the other Jane Austen books like that I own. I have a couple on my Kindle, but I am planning over the next couple of years to get all the matching versions of this edition, which I really like. I think the pictures are really pretty. Next, I've got Week in Winter by Maeve Binchy. This, the readers of Broken Wheel recommend, is a book I got from a neighbor and I haven't read yet. I have October Country by Ray Bradbury. I haven't read that yet, but I look forward to reading it in October. Next, I have a huge chunk of all my Marian Zimmer Bradley books. So I haven't read all of her books. I don't really like her sci-fi, but I do really like her Avalon series. And then also the standalone, The Firebrand, which is a retelling of the fall of Troy through the point of view of Cassandra, which I did enjoy. Jump ahead. The Wolf and the Whale by Jordana Max Brodsky. I haven't read that yet, and I'm not sure if I'm going to. I read like the first chapter and it just didn't grab me as much as I was hoping it would. Moving on from there, I've got People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks, which is a book I love. Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which I just reviewed, I want to say, in my March, maybe April wrap-up. I think it was March, though. City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I really like this book a lot. I have the sequel on my TBR shelf, which I'll show you in a little while. Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. These are the Stay a Spell series by Juliette Cross, which I absolutely adore. The next one's coming out in July, I think, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. These books are fantastic if you like witch romance. So, so good. Next, I have the Castles Ever After series by Tessa Dare, which I'm trying to pull out. There we go. And I have almost all my Tessa Dares on my Kindle that I've read, but I got these in hard copy. And I'm going to give them to my neighbor really soon because she said she wanted to read them. So I had to show them to you before I give them away, because hopefully she'll give them back. But you know, when you give a book away, there's no guarantees you're getting it back. Look at us. We're down a shelf. Also, I didn't say what this little girl is. My same friend who made that beautiful fox drawing bought this for me when I was engaged because it was called The Princess Bride. And it kind of looks like a gnome, which I'm super obsessed with gnomes. And I thought that was really sweet. So I keep it on my bookshelf right there. Okay, next shelf. We're going to start with, we have Well Met by Jen DeLuca, which I haven't read yet and is on my list of books I want to read in 2022. I started this book and it didn't really grab me, but I love Renaissance fairs, so I feel like I should read it. Next, I've got The Red Tent by Anita Dermot, which is one of my favorite books of all time, and I am planning to reread this summer. It's a wonderful, sort of like biblical retelling, but like with more of like a female twist. And it just, some of the lines in here are so beautiful. I really recommend it if you like historical fiction or even like mythology retellings. Give this one a try. Next, I've got The Wonder by Emma Donohue, which I hate this cover, but I love this book. And I just found out, I think Netflix is going to have a series this year at some point with Florence Pugh, and I can't wait to watch it because this book is so creepy. It's like a psychological thriller, but it takes place in Ireland probably about 15 years after the potato famine, and it's about like investigating whether or not a miracle is taking place. Fantastic. Next, I've got The Delectable Tart by Mary Farmer. I've read tons of Mary Farmer books. She writes mostly novellas, and I won this one. It's a signed copy, and almost all the books I have of hers are on my Kindle, but obviously it's signed and it's got like a really sweet inscription, so obviously I'm keeping it. Next, I've got The Edge of Eternity by Ken Follett, which I've never read this book, and I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to do a sort of like book sale in July, and I think this book's going to be there. This is the third book in his like Centuries trilogy, I think it's called. The first one was Fall of Giants, and the second one was Winter of the World. I loved Fall of Giants. I actually bought it on my way home from my honeymoon. We had like this crazy day. We had been on a cruise for a little bit while. We got off our cruise in Copenhagen, and then we had like 8 hours before our flight took off. And then we flew from Copenhagen to Reykjavik. And then when we were in Reykjavik, my husband got detained the entire time for our layover because they just like randomly picked a bunch of people to go through like extra security, and he wasn't allowed to be with me for that whole time. And then we flew to Boston, and then we flew to Chicago, and our trip was over 24 hours total, and it was a nightmare. But Fall of Giants was very good. That was such a long tangent. Winter of the World I liked. That one is about World War II. And this one's about the Cold War, and it's just not like a time period that really interests me. So I don't think I'm ever going to read it. It's like 1,000 pages. Next, I've got Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch, which I am probably not going to read. I did read probably the first 50 pages of it, and I didn't like it very much. So I think this is going to be one that I sell. After that, we have my Carol Goodman collection, which I've read almost all of her books, every one except one. And I don't have them all because I gave a lot of them away to people to read, but I have a few. I've got The Lake of Dead Languages right there with the cool British cover. The Other Mother, which I just read this year. The Night Visitors, which is a good winter vibes creepy book. The Sea of Lost Girls, which is my absolute favorite. This one is so good if you like a good thriller. And then The Stranger Behind You, which is her most recent. She has another one coming out this summer. I can't remember what it's called, but I'll pop a picture of it right here because I will definitely buy, read it, and review it for you very quickly after it comes out. Next, I have a copy of Looking for Alaska, and this is kind of a weird story. I went to see John Green when I was in library school, and it was like for one of my classes, and we had read Looking for Alaska in the class, and at the time I was working for the Chicago Public Libraries, and my boss had a bunch of copies, and she gave me one. She's like, get it and get it signed. So I was with my friend from library school when we walked up together, or we went to the event together, but you had to get tickets, and she got there 30 minutes before I did, so her place in line was like 30 minutes ahead of mine, so she just took my books, and when she was talking to John Green, he got like a little bit confused, and he accidentally signed my book with her name to Elizabeth. So I have Looking for Alaska to Elizabeth. Next, I've got The Midnight Library by Matt Hague. I know a lot of people have like really weird opinions about this book, whereas I thought it was like a fine, good summer read. I gave it to my sister-in-law. She really liked it. My husband liked it. I think it's like a interesting book. You don't have to love it. Next, I've got The Winter Garden by Kristen Hanna, which I started in January and didn't finish because the subject matter was a little too hard for me to handle at this point in my life. So I'm going to hold on to it probably for a couple of years and then decide whether or not I'm going to read it. The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This was a fun thriller I read at the end of last year. I will probably sell this book when I sell everything because I don't think I'm ever going to reread it, and there's no one in my life that I think will like it, so I don't really feel the need to keep it. Then Sister Song by Lucy Holland. This book was fantastic. I heartily recommend it. If you like historical fiction, if you like kind of like the end of the Roman Empire and what happened to all their territories after, with a heavy-handed dose of magic. This also is like an ancient history book that has great trans representation. If that's something you're interested in, I think the author did a really good job handling it in that time period. The sun finally came out, so like my glasses are getting all glary because there's a big window there. I'm sorry. Okay, the next couple books are The Anatomist's Wife by Anna Lee Huber, fun mystery. I want to read the rest. My own book, Something Wicked by Lucy Hudson, which is the only one I did like a hard paperback copy of. I did ebooks for the rest of them. This is my fall book, obviously, if you can't tell. And then Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Nealy Hurston, which is arguably my favorite classic. I kind of go back and forth between this one and The End of the Affair by Graham Greene. Next, I have Rebel by Beverly Jenkins, which I haven't read yet. I'm planning to read this summer, and I've heard really good things about, and I can't wait. It takes place in New Orleans, and I really like New Orleans as a setting because I feel like it usually is almost like its own character. And this is a historical setting of New Orleans. I'm not exactly sure. I know it's after the Civil War, but I'm not exactly sure how long after the Civil War. Next, I've got Firelight by Sophie Jordan, which I did buy accidentally, but I'm hoping to read this year. It's a YA. I thought it was an adult romance. It's about dragons. We'll see. And then the last two books on this shelf, my husband's uncle and I love talking about books, and he has like a very impressive library. And for my birthday one year, kind of as a joke, he bought me Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses, and I've never read either of them. I read like the first two chapters, the first 2 pages of Finnegan's Wake. And a funny thing, when he gave me these, because they're very thick, my husband's brother looked at me and said, "How long would it take you to read this book, Finnegan's Wake?" And my husband's uncle, the giver, said, "The rest of her life." Okay, for this shelf, I'm on a chair, and we're only going to be here for a second, because this is my Juliette Marillier shelf. Every single book on this shelf is a Juliette Marillier book. I did a whole video about all of these books, which I'll link in the description, and I won't go over them all in depth right now. But we've got the Seven Waters series, we have the Light Isles series, the Burdett Chronicles, her standalone Heart's Blood, the Blackthorn and Grimm series, the Wildwood Dancing series, Shadowfell series, and the Warrior Birds series. These are not really in like chronological order in terms of her writing them. They're more just how I wanted to put them on the shelf. All right, officially on the ground. This is my last shelf of fiction that's not on my TBR shelf. I have 2 Colleen McCullough books, The Thornbirds, which was one of my favorite books for a really long time, and I have this great mass market edition that I got for my 15th birthday. I've read this 2 times, I think. I don't think I've read it 3. And then her book, The Touch, which this had a dust jacket at some point. My mom loves to like inscribe books, and she gave this to me for my 21st birthday, and so it's got like a great inscription in it. And I was living in London at the time, so it talks about that, and I think it's just like a cool keepsake. Next, I have The Clockmaker's Daughter by Kate Morton. I've read a lot of Kate Morton, but the majority I've gotten from the library, but this is one that I did buy, and it was beautiful. Her writing is gorgeous. Grab it if you like a beautiful sort of historical mystery, but not like a traditional mystery. Then I have The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, which a lot of people read when it came out. It's a fun sort of historical magical realism. I wouldn't say it's like high fantasy, about 2 women in the late 1700s and then plus a woman in the present day kind of uncovering their life. There's a lot of murder of men in it. It was a good time. Next, I have my totally battered copy of My True Love Gave to Me, which is missing this dust jacket. My kids have colored in it, but I love this book and I read it all the time. It's also signed by Rainbow Rowell, which is very cool. I read it not all the time. I read it every Christmas. I might take this year off because when I was reading it this year, I felt like I was a little oversaturated with the material at this point. Next, I have Nemesis by Brendan Reichs, and I actually never read this book. I went to an author event with him, and it was him and Veronica Roth together, and I won a raffle there to be murdered in the sequel to this, and I never read this, and then I never read the sequel, which I've always kind of felt bad about. And by me be murdered, it just meant that he was going to name a character after me who was going to be like a throwaway character who's going to get killed. But maybe I'll eventually read it. I'm kind of off YA, so I haven't been reading much, but I obviously have been holding on to it. Next, I've got Engagement Espionage by Penny Reed. I won this in a Instagram giveaway, I think. It's autographed by her. I love the Winston Brothers series, so I have all those on my Kindle rather than hard copies, but it was fun to get a hard copy, and I really like the cover. It's really cool looking. Then we've got If We Were Villains by ML Rio, which is super fun, dark academia. Everyone should read it in October-ish book. I also have a copy of Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth, which I don't know what happened to these dust jackets. My kids probably stole them. And it is autographed. I didn't read it either. It's from the same event that I went to with Brendan Reichs. And honestly, I got these books right when I was kind of getting off YA. And they sat on my shelf for a while. And then by the time I thought about picking them up, I just wasn't really into YA anymore. This is the, I think, Canadian version of the last Harry Potter book. I worked at an indie bookstore when it came out, and I was in charge of the Harry Potter party, and it was like the biggest thing I ever did in my career. And my boss went to Canada, I think Canada, not England, right after the party. So she bought me this kind of like as a thank you. So I've actually never read this version. I read Harry Potter, like the last one, like the American version, but I've never actually read this version. But I thought it was a really nice gift, and I really had a good relationship with my boss, so I've always held on to it. I've got volume 1 of Lore Olympus. I'm looking forward very much to all of these coming out because I don't like reading webtoons on my computer, so I will just continually buy them, and I think the next one's coming out this summer at some point, so it'll have a partner pretty soon. So Many Partings by Kathy Cash Spellman is a book my aunt gave me a few years ago that I haven't gotten to, but I do really want to read it because it's her favorite book, and I think she has very good taste. Next, we've got my collection of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So I have the matching for, oh my gosh, my kids messed up the order. Excuse me. So I have the matching for The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Unfinished Tale. My Silmarillion doesn't match because I already owned it. I've read these more than once, minus The Unfinished Tales and The Silmarillion. I've only read those once. But I did a book club with my friends probably about 5 years ago where we read all of this series. And so I bought like really pretty matching ones for these. But then I already owned the Silmarillion, this like beat up old copy I got from Half Price Books. But it's fine. It still reads, but it doesn't look as pretty on my shelf. This is just something cute my kids made that says, "My house is a home," and it's like a little poem that I really like. That's why I leave it out there. My last 2 books on this shelf are Rules of Civility by Amor Towles, which I haven't read, and I gave myself 1 more year to read this book before I sell it. And then The Storied Life of A.J. Filkry by Gabrielle Zevin, which I really enjoyed this book. It's like a contemporary fiction about kind of like the lives of people who live on this small island that surround a bookstore, and it turned out to be way more emotional than I thought it was going to be. And that's all my fiction that's not on my TBR shelf, so now we're going to move to more like nonfiction-y type books. Really quickly, this bottom shelf, which I can't even really fit in here, are books that I inherited from my grandfather, which I love. They are a Time Life series that I think are called like Ages of Mankind, called Great Ages of Man, a history of the world's cultures, and they go from everywhere. They have Imperial Rome, Ancient Americas, Classical Greece, Barbarian Europe, Early Japan, on and on and on. I've never read them like cover to cover, but I do enjoy flipping through them often. We've also got the Chronicle of Western Fashion, Ancient Empires, and then over here, just randomly, the Mountain States, the Old South, and District of Columbia, part of the Time Life Library of America. And then lastly, I've got this big old illustrated encyclopedia of country living, which is basically about running a farm. And honestly, this book was really cool at the beginning of the pandemic because you start thinking like, oh my God, what's life going to look like? Am I going to have to be a farmer? Good thing I don't, but I like to grow food, so it's kind of a cool book to look at. This bookcase, which is identical to that bookcase, is my nonfiction bookcase. And I should say, like, where are my bookcases from? I bought them off Craigslist in 2008, and they were like Crate and Barrel bookcases that someone was selling, and this was like my first big personal purchase because it was like 2 years after I moved out of my parents' house, and I had owned like really, really crappy Target bookcases before that had kind of fallen apart, and like the bookshelves all bowed. They were definitely not meant for like books. They were meant for people who had like tchotchkes and pictures up there, which I did not. I have heavy books. So I love these bookcases. I still have them, and they've held up really well. I know, I've had them for like 14 years now, and the person before me had them for at least 2. I'm going to do this shelf kind of fast because I don't think it's that interesting to people other than myself. Over here, I have my old Bible from when I was in college, and then I have the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. I don't have a pretty Iliad. I got it for college, and obviously I wasn't going for beauty. But I have a pretty Odyssey, and I have a very pretty Aeneid, which I haven't read yet, but is on my list to read in 2022. I'm going to try to read that in July. Hold me to it. And then I've got the Metamorphosis by Ovid, and I've never read the whole thing of this. I've read bits and pieces, though. Moving on from there, we have books I am currently using for a work in progress I'm writing, and that is Tacitus's the Agricola and Germania. I've read this several times. I had to read it for school. I read it probably like 5 years ago when I first had the idea for this book. And then I read it again like 2 months ago. And then the early Germans. I haven't read all of this. I've read about 50%. It's just about like early German culture and like weird things like, did they eat pig? Next, we have some of my books from college that are my favorites, so I'll never give them away. And that is Beowulf, which I absolutely adore. This is a collection of Middle English verse romances, this class was hard. And I loved it, though. Next, I've got Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which I'm still haven't seen The Green Knight, which I really want to see because I love Dev Patel, and I really like this story a lot. And then I've got L'Amour d'Arthur, which was really important to me because I did my senior thesis on women in Arthur, and that's when I read this for the first time. I've read little bits and pieces of it several times, but I really like Arthurian legend. It's important to me in my soul. Next, I have this huge book that's called The Saga of the Icelanders, which I bought at a rummage sale probably close to 20 years ago and still haven't read, but maybe someday. I'm sorry if you can hear my kids in the background. I have 2 kids homesick today, and there's not much I can do about it. Then I've got this Irish Fairy and Folktales, which I want to see what bookmark is in here. I bought this in college. So the last one I was reading was The Solitary Fairies, and just to give you an insight of who I was in college, that's the bookmark I have in there. Ooh, look at Legolas. I was a huge Legolas fan from like age 18 to 22-ish. I still like him. I still think Orlando Bloom is one of the most handsome men around. Moving on from my 19-year-old thirst, I have 2 books next that I have kept holding on to because I used them a ton in library school, and that is The Library at Night, which is kind of like a history of libraries, and that's by Alberto Manguel. And then A History of Reading in the West, which was actually one of my textbooks for my senior seminar when I was at university. And I used it a ton in my master's program because it is a lot about a history of reading in Western civilization, which was helpful for different projects. And I just haven't wanted to give it away. No one will buy this. And I don't even think Half Price Books would take it because it's a textbook from like 2003 probably. But yeah, so I hold on to it. All right, I moved a little bit. Oh, this is shaky. Okay. Got 2 early American writers here. I have Women in the 19th Century by Margaret Fuller, which is a book that sort of like changed my views on early feminism in America, and I really like that book a lot. And then Walden by Henry David Thoreau and Civil Disobedience. I've never read the complete Walden, and I got this a couple years ago for Christmas, and I still haven't read the complete Walden. I've read parts of it, but yeah, I'm holding on to it. I really like the Transcendentalists, who are like Thoreau, Emerson, Fuller, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Louise May Alcott. I think they're like a cool writers group in early American history. Next, we have my very small philosophy section, which has 2 books by Luce Irigaray and 2 books by Benjamin Hoff. This section, which is not one, is my favorite philosophy book of all time. It is a lot about the difference of like the sexuality of the feminine versus the masculine, and I read it in college and have held on to it ever since. And then Between East and West is also by Luce Irigaray. This is about the difference between philosophies of Western cultures versus Eastern cultures. I liked this one, but I didn't love it like this Sex, which is not one. Next, I have The Tao of Pooh and the Tay of Piglet. I'm mainly holding on to these because I think my kids might want to read them when they're a little bit older. I have a book of essays I just read by Zadie Smith, Intimations. This was a nice fast read if you're looking for just like sort of short snippets. It discusses a lot about what life was like at the beginning of the pandemic, specifically for creators. This is just a really cool book my husband's uncle got me. It's What is Economics by Rosa Luxemburg. When I was in college, I made the mistake of once telling my husband's uncle that I was like interested in anarchism. This is like 20 years ago. And so then he, for the next like 10 years, he hasn't done it in a while, he gave me like tons of like pamphlets and stuff like that, trying to sway me deeper into that, which I'm not interested in becoming an anarchist. But I used to have a ton of cool little books like this. This is the only one I saved because when I was on my honeymoon in Germany, we actually were on Rosa Luxemburg like Boulevard or something, and so I thought it was cool. I've read parts of this. I have a great picture of my 6-year-old last summer. She just like grabbed this off the shelf and like went and sat in the sun and was like reading this like the cool girl she is. Then I have 2 of my small poetry books. I also have some poetry on my TBR shelf, but I've got Love Poems by Pablo Neruda and The Essential Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson's my favorite poet of all time. This book I read over and over and over again when I was pregnant with my twins, so it's very special to me. I'm so sorry. I have like a door right here outside into our, like onto our porch, and so the glare is terrible because it's sunny out. I apologize. I'm going to try to do this shelf pretty fast because I feel like that's going to be hard to edit out. So in this corner, I have my 3 favorite writing books, which are Romancing the Beat, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and The Writer's Journey. They're my 3 faves. I recommend everybody read them who's getting started writing. Next, I have my witchy books. You can't write a series about witches without reading some witchy books. So I have a book on tarot that is 78 Degrees of Wisdom, which one of my friends who is like a legitimate tarot card reader recommended this one to me. I've read a big chunk of it, but not all of it. And then I have my books by Ellen Dugan, who writes my favorite witch books. The Autumn Equinox, The Garden Witch's Herbal, Cottage Witchery, Garden Witchery, Seasons of Witchery, and Natural Witchery. I like them all a lot. We move into my gardening books. Do these fast because I don't think everyone's that into it. Growing Vegetables, Herbal Remedies, Herbarium. This book is beautiful. It's like just like gorgeous pictures with herbs, how you grow them, what they're good for. And then A Year in Flowers. This book is also beautiful. A Monty Don book because he teaches me how to garden. Some kid gardening books also here. Then I've got a few travel books because I am of the age where you used to like buy travel books before you went on vacation. So they just sit here. I've used the national parks one since my kids have been born because we've taken them to a couple national parks, and it's nice to know beforehand like what trails are, you know, accessible for a 3-year-old walking. The rest of the shelf is like a really big hodgepodge. So I have a collection of Irish fiction. I have a memoir written by a woman who I did a writing retreat with, Laura Munson. I've got a biography of Jane Austen that I've never read. This is a really cool book that my mother-in-law gave me probably like 10 years ago. And it's like an illustrated early American history. I don't really know how to describe it. But if you're looking for a book for someone who loves American history and you feel like they've read everything, I would take a look at this. It's called And the Pursuit of Happiness. And it's by Maria Kalman. It's just like a really cool, like almost like a coffee table book, but in novel size. Next, I've got Doomed Queens. Who wrote this? By Chris Waldher. And this is just short stories about queens and princesses that met horrible ends. Literary Worlds is another book my mom gave me, so it's got a good inscription in it. But it just goes through all different worlds created by authors at different points. I like it. All right, I've got the Little Book of Like, which is the companion to the Little Book of Huga, which I loved that book. Lent it to my sister. She never gave it back. This one wasn't as good. The Little Book of Feminist Saints. It's just a little book of people who were important to the feminist movement throughout the world and throughout time. And I find it interesting. And then I have 2 books on knitting that I'm not going to get out because they're kind of jammed back there. Now, let's move on. All right, we skipped this shelf up here because it's my husband's shelf and his books are boring. But if you're really interested in books on competing in triathlons or like sports biographies, they're all on that shelf. Moving on to my shelf. This, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because it's my interior design shelf and my cookbook shelf. The best cookbooks in the world are The Forest Feast. I actually have the new one on my mantle right now because whenever I buy a new cookbook, I keep it on my mantle for like 2 months to remind myself to use it and get some new recipes that I feel comfortable with. But if you ever need to get like a present for someone, I think this is like the best. Either like moving into a new apartment or wedding present for someone you feel like you want to get a gift for, but you don't want to spend a ton of money because they're really, really easy recipes and they don't have that many ingredients and they're all usually pretty easy to find. And then I just stuck this one here because I don't really have anywhere else to put it, and that's What We See in the Stars by Kelsey, I think you say Oseed. Her Instagram's really cool, and this is just a beautifully illustrated, kind of like astronomy book that I really, really like, and my kids like too. It's beautiful, it's calming. Take a look at it. Okay, so the bottom shelf here, over here are all like my husband's large books plus our yearbooks, so I'm not going to go into there. But this is where I keep kind of my oversized fantasy and some map books. So I have the Delaire's Book of Greek Myths, and my copy, this is going to knock everything over, this is not the original copy I bought. I had a copy from when I was a kid that sort of fell apart, and then I was teaching a mythology class, which I used to do in the summer to elementary kids. And the library I was working at was getting rid of this copy, so they said I could have it so that like I didn't have to buy a new copy to get destroyed at camp for like the 4 years I taught. And I haven't bought myself a new copy yet. I'm going to. But if you love Greek mythology, I would really recommend getting this, even if you're an adult, just because it's really beautiful and the pictures are so cool and it just really holds a place in my heart. I also have the Delaire's Book of Norse Myths and Trolls, if you like those. Those are also great, especially if you have a small human in your life who's into mythology. They're wonderful. I've got some Brian Froud books, which I feel like he was used to be huge, but now people aren't that into him. But I've got the Runes of Elfland, which is a really cool book that takes each rune and then you get a short story with some illustrations. But they're all really cool and fantastical. Brian Froud worked on I know he worked on Dark Crystal, and I think he worked on Labyrinth with Jim Henson. So picture those kind of illustrations, that kind of feel. And then Good Fairies and Bad Fairies, which is such a cool book because this side is Good Fairies and then this side is Bad Fairies. And the book literally works one side is upside down. Look at that creepy picture. He's got really good creepy stuff. Love it. I also have some atlases over here. I have a big atlas over there. I'm really into maps. There's a lot of maps in this room. And then some other fantasy type encyclopedias, other mythology books, the Spiderwick Guide to the Fantastical World, which my son is now getting into, so I'm looking forward to it. I think we might read Spiderwick together this summer. So let's move to another shelf. This is probably the worst place in the world to film because I'm literally sitting in front of a window, which thankfully is northern exposure and not due east right now as the sun is blaring. But this is where I keep all my book of the month books, and obviously my desk is right here and you can see all my cords. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing area of my house, but here's where I keep all my book of the month books. I have I'm going to pick up my camera. I hope it's not too shaky. And I have them organized from oldest to newest. And there's a couple not on there yet because they're still on my TBR shelf. But I'm going to do a huge video about everything I've gotten from Book of the Month at the end of June, because then I will have belonged for a full year. Hey, I'm sitting here editing and realizing something weird happened with my camera when I was going through my Book of the Month books. I was going to tell you the titles of all of them, but it cut off and I didn't even notice it when I was filming. And I'm not going to do that now. I will give you in about a month a really thorough review of my experience with Book of the Month and what I thought of every book I got from them in the last 12 months. So stay tuned. This is impossible to show this shelf because I have a ton of pictures of my children on it and I don't want to show their faces on YouTube. So I'm just going to flip really quickly to this and then flip back. Let's see, get it low enough. All right there. It's a mess. That is, for some reason, my Better Homes and Gardens cookbook, which I use occasionally because it has good muffin recipes. But it's also my Enchanted World series collection, which I'm not going to go one by one on. But it's this Time Life collection that I love, that I'm trying to get the whole thing of. Let's go look at my TBR shelf. I don't know if I'm flexible enough to film here. But if I put it higher, you can't see the books. Uh-oh. All right, let's try it like this. I feel like I'm a jungle cat crouched and about to spring. Slowly. But this is where I keep my TBR books. This is my bedside table. So all the books I want to read pretty soon, I keep up here because then it's easy if I finish a book at night, I can just grab another one off my shelf. So the majority of the books on here right now are things that I bought in my birthday book haul. So I'll go through them really quickly and I'll link that video in the description if you want more info. So I put the ones I want to read right away right here, and then the ones I want to read next are over there. So we've got While the Duke Was Sleeping by Sophie Jordan, The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray, The Kingsman by Elizabeth Kingston. Yeah, Elizabeth Kingston. Siren Queen by Niveau, which is a Book of the Month pick. The Love of My Life by Rosie Walsh, which is also a Book of the Month pick I haven't gotten to yet. I also have random notebooks and stuff stuck in here that I'm not going to get out. Undressed by the Marquess by Christy Caldwell. Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. Seduce Me at Sunrise by Lisa Kleypas. I love this book. I've read it before. I want to reread it this summer. Blackbird House by Alice Hoffman. My Antonia by Willie Cather. Goddess of the Hunt by Tessa Dare. The House of Spirits by Isabel Allende. Sorry, the glare is terrible. This is a south-facing room. Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And The Distant Hours by Kate Morton. So that's all my TBR up here. Ooh, books are falling. And then I have a lot of random books over here. I've got some poetry books. some parenting books. I have my favorite Zodiac book of all time, which I actually just rebought it because I had an old one that I got for my 13th birthday that my kids destroyed, but it's the Little Giant Encyclopedia of the Zodiac. If you like astrology, it's a really fun read. And then I have some random books that just kind of made their way up here. 3 have to do with like research I'm doing for writing. The History of a Private Life is one. Pax Romana is another. And The History of the Kings of Britain. And then I have some random like witchy books and a bunch of journals. And then a garden book that I sometimes look at when I'm stressed. And then lastly, we've got to look at what I'm currently reading, which is on my bedside table. So this is like the weirdest filming angle I've ever done, lounging on my floor. When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. I just started this like 2 nights ago, I think. I've only read the first couple chapters. It's interesting so far. It's about kind of an alternate history in which a bunch of women spontaneously turned into dragons in the 1950s. And we're following it through the point of view of a girl who was young when it happens. And I know eventually she's going to be a teen in this book, but right now she's still young. And I'm liking it so far. It's kind of got this like weird vibe, but I'm digging it. And then I, of course, have my Kindle. I'm currently reading an arc of one of my friend's books, who's an author. Her name's Katie Hunter, and it's called Beasts of Time. And it is a time-traveling romance, and I know there's going to be a werewolf at some point, but I haven't met the werewolf yet. But I'll give you a full review when I finish both of those. Now, let's get someplace more comfortable for my outro. I'm too tired to, like, set up a good outro space. And my room is destroyed from all the cardboard blocks I have everywhere trying to get the angles right. So we're going to do the outro right here on the couch. And that's not every adult book I own, because I do have some like, just like random piles of like travel books and stuff like that on like end tables. And I didn't want to take the time to go through all of those. But that was a pretty good chunk of the adult books I own. I'm going to count how many I have. And obviously I didn't talk about my husband's books, and he probably has like 40 on his shelf because they're really jammed in there. But I'm guessing I have around 300 adult books, maybe a little bit more. I'll put how many in the title, though, so you know exactly how many. Thanks for hanging out and looking at my bookcases. It was a really nice motivation for me to clean them a few days ago and dust them and get them looking spick and span. I am going to do a big unhaul this summer, and after I do, I will probably do another bookshelf tour so you can see what made it, what didn't, and what new stuff I bought. Also, once my TBR continues to be read, books get moved off that shelf and onto my regular shelf. I'm also going to run out of space on my book of the month shelf, so I'm probably going to go through those books and see if there's any. I know there are a couple that I do for sure want to sell, but then the ones I want to keep, I might integrate into my regular fiction bookshelves rather than having them on my specific book of the month. That might be specifically for new within the last year or so, or like 6 months, just to keep it tight. Because I buy a lot of books from Book of the Month. I can't help myself. I love it. Thank you for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you saw maybe 1 or 2 or 17 books you are interested in. And if you have any questions about ones that I like skimmed over, feel free to throw in the comments like, what was this book about? And I'll tell you. I love that. I'm a librarian. Telling people about books is my favorite thing. In closing, and as always, I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I have to put this room back together. See you soon.